Rev Don Lewis, coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and more particularly from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And this is Midday with Rev Don. And as you know, if you follow this program, if you want to talk to me directly, you can type your comments or your questions into whatever platform you happen to be watching on, and they will show up here in my chat room and we can talk directly, which is probably my favorite part of this broadcast. And there are a couple of different things I want to talk about today, but first I want to say that I hope that you had a wonderful Labor Day weekend, and also, if you happen to be Corellian, a wonderful Corellian Founding Day, and a wonderful Witch School anniversary yesterday. And hello to Rev Michael in the chat room. It's good to see you, Michael. It was certainly an interesting weekend here in Danville. This coming weekend, September 9th, I will be reading at Moon and Willows here in Danville, Illinois. And if you would like to come to that, if you're in the area, it would be great to see you. And I will be doing tarot cards, past life readings, work with spirit guides, whatever people might be interested in. And I'll be there throughout the business day. And hello to Deb in the chat room. It's good to see you, Deb. This will be the first time that I have read in a store this way in a very long time, so it's will be quite nice. I used to do that quite regularly at an earlier part in my life. And so it's interesting to be getting back to that as I slowly get everything back on in a new pattern in my life. And it is also a place where you can get my books if you're locally. I will be signing books if that's something that somebody wants. We have a number of things happening. I put out a number of photographs yesterday from the Parliament of the World's Religions. I hope that you got to see those and enjoyed them. I enjoyed putting them out. It was great to relive that experience. We had a half-price sale going on at CorellianPublishing.com. That ended yesterday. And we continue forward. Today, what I wanted to talk about is the idea of community directories. And this is something that in the last few years has been talked about quite a bit, particularly with the end of Witchfox. A lot of people very much miss the directory aspect of Witchfox. And I thought I would talk a little bit about the idea of community directories, the idea of how they help communities, and what we're doing in this regard. And if you have any comments on the subject, please feel free to add them in the chat room. We will be very happy to discuss them. I was talking last week when we were talking about Corellianism in the last couple of decades about how we did the Roundtable magazine in Chicago. And this was a community magazine that dealt with local community news, national news, articles of interest. And it also had every week, or rather every month, a community directory. And at the height of that directory, it had 30 different temples and organizations that were listed in it. And hello to Mary in the chat room. Good to see you, Mary. And one of the things that this did, it obviously got news of those organizations out into the pagan community, in some cases for the first time. It certainly helped to raise people's awareness of them. But, it was less a benefit, I think, to the organizations than to the community itself. A lot of people in the pagan community didn't necessarily know what resources were available to them. I can remember having people tell me they could not find anything pagan in Chicago at a point in time when the community was booming because they didn't know where to look. Community resources like this give you a place where you can look. You can see what's there, you can see what's new, and you can decide what, if anything, you want to go out and patronize. I think that they're very beneficial both to the organizations that are listed, but more importantly to the people in the community. And um, it is, I think, something that we very much do need to have more of. I don't think that we need to have just one. I think that the more that exists, the better for everyone. And one of the things that we're doing at Pagan World is we're putting together just such a directory, and you can find that at pagan.world/directory. And it has a listing of different stores. Um, and it certainly will continue to expand and grow and alter what it includes. And one of the things, again, that people complain about in the community is not being able to find things, even in sometimes booming communities. And that's why this sort of thing is helpful. One of the things I always felt particularly proud of Witch School for was that it reached the people who were not otherwise being served. People who were geographically isolated from communities, people who were, in some cases, physically isolated from communities because of disabilities and the like, were able to access what we were offering. And also people who just were too closeted to know where to go in their local area. And this is a thing. It is something that I think a lot of people who are in the active community don't realize, and that is how easy it is to miss them if you don't know where to look. And this was always the case. You go back to the 1980s, and if you wanted to find what magazines, and hello to Tom in the chat room, and Tom says, "Nice haircut." Thank you, Tom. But if you wanted to know, for example, what magazines were available, there were three places to find that. One is at festivals and other sorts of events. The other was inside an existing pagan magazine that had a directory in it, which most of them did. Or the other one was at a local metaphysical bookstore. But if you didn't have one of those three things that you were at, where were you going to find it? And the answer was you weren't going to find it. I was very fortunate. I came from a family that was already practicing, but our resources were not particularly large. But living in Danville, oddly enough, for people who look at Danville, there was quite a pagan community here. I was able in the mid-1970s to go down into downtown Danville and buy pagan books at a local, actually a tobacconist, if you remember what those were. But he regularly carried pagan books. One that I particularly remember getting there was the Golden Treasury of the Witch's Almanac, which is still available, but at that time was quite new. And it was right here in Danville. There were a number of different pagan groups here, which mostly did not have communication with one another at that time, much more so today. But it did mean that there were resources here if you knew where to look. But if you didn't, you'd have never known there was anything here. One of the things that I always thought was particularly interesting, and this issue of directory speaks to it very clearly, is when we took the Witch School headquarters to Hoopeston, many Christians in Hoopeston of a certain sort were very upset at the idea of Wiccans coming into their community. They didn't realize a significant Wiccan temple had closed just 6 months earlier that had been there for years, but didn't cause enough of a commotion for anyone to be aware of it, except those people who were aware. There were numerous pagan groups in Hoopeston at that time, totally separate from us. Some of them we never actually were able to connect with, but they were there or we met them once. But if you didn't know where to find them, you weren't going to find them. And for the person who wants to learn, that is a serious issue. Um, they say that when you're ready, the teacher will appear, and there's some truth to that. But there has to also be a teacher there, and um, I think it does us all a great deal of good to have these resources where we can all find them. To be able to go and say, well, I live in Elgin, Illinois. Is there a bookstore near me? I live in Evanston, Illinois. Is there a temple near me? I live in uh, Chicago. Is there a metaphysical organization near me? And to be able to find these in a relatively easy manner really is a tremendous thing for the community that does it. Because what's going to happen is a lot more people supporting the local businesses, which in turn tend to support the local community. And very, very much more then becomes doable for everyone. There are some people who don't understand why it's important that there be metaphysical businesses, but they support a lot of what happens in the pagan and metaphysical communities. A lot of the festivals that happen couldn't necessarily happen at the same level without the merchant contingent. A lot of the supplies that we love to have wouldn't be there if we didn't have all these merchants producing and selling them. If there were just a handful of little artisans that you had to know to find, you're not going to find very much. And if you're old enough to remember, you'll remember when it was that way. One of the things I frequently complain about, there's been a meme on Facebook talking about how back in the day, you had to work to do this and do that and do the other thing. But today, anyone who buys sage at Whole Foods thinks that they're a witch and that this is somehow bad. But I have to tell you, back in the day, anyone who is really there is going to tell you they would have loved to be able to find their supplies that easily. A lot of these things were difficult to find if you were going to find them at all. And if there was not a metaphysical bookstore nearby, chances are you weren't going to find them. Or you would have to have them shipped to you at sometimes quite great expense. And more unusual things were not going to be that easy to find. One of the things I remember from like the 1970s is that there were a lot of places to buy books, but you didn't know what you were getting until you got it. I can remember buying a lot of books on the subject of witchcraft, including witchcraft in the modern world, that had nothing to do with how I was using that term, but had more to do with, say, demonology or Satanism. But that was nowhere in the description of the book, so you didn't know till you got it. In those days, it was far harder to get things, and I think that we take for granted how easy it is to get them now. And I think that we really need to stop doing that. One of the things that the quote commercialization of metaphysics has done is that if you want a good incense, you can usually find it fairly close to you. If you want a metaphysical stone, you can usually find it fairly close to you. If you want to get metaphysical books, you can usually find them fairly close to you. And that certainly was not always the case. It was a very different world back in the day. And there are people who'll tell you how much more that they liked it back then. And my answer is either they weren't there back then or they're using selective memory. Because everyone I knew really would have loved to have been able to get things more easily than what we get them now. And I'll give you an example of something you probably wouldn't think about. But a lot of people today have a small cauldron that they will keep on their altar or among their working supplies. And these are easy to find now. But if you go back to the 1970s, that was not the case, at least in many parts of the country. I imagine if you were in Chicago, you could have found one more easily, because you could go to a Hispanic grocery store and find them quite easily because they're still used as a cooking implement, often in Hispanic cuisine, but not necessarily in central Illinois. They were much harder to find. In fact, I don't remember ever seeing anything like that in the 1970s. But I remember a lot of people who would have liked to have had them. Um, Over time, they've become easily available anywhere. Today, you can order it offline, not have a second thought about it. Um, but back in the day, if you were looking, for example, for something to do burnings in, um, although I will say doing burnings in the 70s was a little bit easier because although fire detectors were a thing, they were not as sensitive as they are now. So doing a burning in your home was a lot more possible at that time. But if you were looking for something to do it with, you're probably going to have to go to the plant supplies section and get like a brass planter, because most of the things you might otherwise use were not readily available at that time. I remember there was a book by, I want to say, T. Manley Hall back in the 60s that talked about making a thurible for the burning of incense. If you don't know what a thurible is, it is an incense burner, a censer hanging on chains that you swish back and forth. And that makes it a thurible as opposed to just a censer. But he had instructions on how to make one using a tuna can, because for most people, that's the best they were going to do. And the tuna can worked beautifully. You would clean it out completely. It was perfect for burning your incense in. You'd add a little level of sand at the bottom or gravel or something, and your charcoal, and then your powdered incense, which is what thuribles are mostly used for. And you had it. And yes, there's a certain pleasure in making it that way, but there's also a certain pleasure in buying a damn thurible. And today, easy to find. They're made very inexpensively in brass, easy to find, or you can find actual artwork thuribles that are beautiful additions to your altar, if that's something that you want. And when we talk about directories like this, it's how you find places that you can get these things. Now, of course, you can go to Amazon. Everything's on Amazon. And I have nothing against Amazon. I do lots of shopping there myself when I'm in a position to be spending money. But I think if you can also patronize local stores, that this is highly desirable. And it's desirable for a couple of reasons. One, it builds your local community. And two, it's much more likely that a local supplier is actually making what they supply. And by helping them to stay in business, you help that product to remain something you can get in the future. One of the things that I regret having seen gone away over the years. Years ago, I've been going to the St. Louis Pagan Picnic up until the last couple of years when illness and other things prevented me. But for something like 20 years. And there used to be a jeweler who was there every year and did wonderful brass jewelry. And one year they were simply no longer there. I'm sure there are other people who do similar types of jewelry, but I really liked that producer, and their website is gone. And this was 10 years ago, but it was gone then. Trying to find them thereafter was never possible. Either they went out of business or they died. Or they simply found that that some other audience served them better. But when we have directories like this, it would be easy to find someone else doing similar work. So I very strongly want to encourage you to consider using pagan.world/directory and maybe supplying some new possible listings for it as we continue to expand it. It is a very positive thing. And, it's interesting sitting here talking about these things and looking at how the world has changed. And I guess I've been doing that for the last week but I think it's time to start looking more toward the future again. It's important to remember changes in the past, and we're going to continue doing that. One of the things I want to do on my Patreon is another evening with the Corellian ancestors. Um, and for those who were there for that, what we did is that night we talked about stories of the ancestors and channeling from the ancestors. And we probably will be doing that again soon. If you're not part of my Patreon, you can find that at revdonlewis.com. I do a number of different things for my Patreon supporters, including a weekly chat room, a monthly newsletter, a monthly surprise, which at present is an original piece of artwork. I sent out the very first one quite recently, and then also a possible monthly consultation if you would like that. All of these different things are possible, and if you would like to support my work, that's one of the best places to do it. Again, I'm also doing readings. If you were interested in the reading, you can contact me by email at donlewishp@aol.com or by instant message at Facebook or Instagram, and of course, Corellian Publishing. We have just brought out a new book, Travel Magic by Lisa McSherry, and I'm hoping to have her back on the program here presently to talk about it. It is now about to become available as an ebook, and Travel Magic is a very interesting book in that it is specifically oriented at magic you might use while you're traveling. How to secure a positive trip, how to work with weather, how to work with protecting your baggage. You know, when Lady Rain came from South Africa to Chicago for the Problem of the World's Religions, her baggage went to Germany. Why her baggage showed up in Germany when she was coming to the United States, I have no idea, but that's where it ended up. Luckily, it did reach her within a couple of days. But, you know, Travel Magic has spells and charms to help prevent that sort of thing from happening. So I highly recommend it. Yet at the same time, it's also a basic primer in magic. You don't have to know anything to get the benefit of the book. You can have it as your very first book and still get enough out of it to be able to use it, because it does address that person who's never done these things before. It addresses all the basic arts as well as how to use them in these ways. And I think it's a very good book. And, you know, I remember interviewing Elysia Gallo back in, I don't know what year, at the International New Age Trade Show. And she is the acquisitions manager for Llewellyn worldwide. I believe she still is. She certainly was has been for quite a while. And I asked her the question that everybody was asking about Llewellyn at that time, the fact they keep bringing out 101 books, and why they continue to do that. And her answer was, the community is constantly growing, and there's a constant need for 101 books, a constant need to go over these same things for people, and they don't tend to buy the older books quite as readily if it's their first book. And that actually made very good sense to me. And I think that we have to remember, particularly at a time like this, when we have lots of new people coming into the community, that many of them don't have that background. And we have to be prepared to share our knowledge with them. I've watched people over the years who were simply contemptuous of people with lesser knowledge. And those are often the same people now who say, well, nobody listens to me. Well, of course nobody's listening to you. You never listen to anyone else. Being contemptuous of other people is not the way you're going to get them to listen to you. So when we meet people who don't have knowledge, we need to be prepared to share that knowledge with them. But we can't really be surprised if they don't have the knowledge if we ourselves won't share it. Or at least I think that we need to take that point of view. When we started Witch School, we very much took that point of view. We're currently working on Psychic Academy. We're going to take that same point of view. That we're talking to people who could have 20 years or they could have 20 minutes. And they all must be spoken to at the same time. And In some cases that means you're reviewing certain information, but that never really hurts anything. But one of the things I've often talked about is that depending on who you're talking to, how they spent that 20 years might not have certain things in it. I've often talked about working at D&H psychic fairs back in the 1980s and working with a lot of spiritualist psychics for whom the idea of grounding was not a thing. And you could tell this looking at them. You could tell that they desperately needed grounding and didn't know how to do it. So just because someone's been there for a long time doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad thing to go over certain basics. And not only that, but the other thing is you may find them telling you things you didn't know because they have superior knowledge in some cases. And how great is that? The best thing about being in a position of being a student of the people you're teaching. And everyone, no matter how much background they have, has something to teach you also. So that's very much my attitude on that subject. We've talked about teaching before, and I think I'll take a couple of moments to say a few more things. But the goal of being a teacher is both to expand and pass on. I don't think passing on is enough. I think you must also work to expand, and you must, to be a good teacher, you must be your students must become better than you were yourself. If all you've done is replicate yourself, you haven't really done well enough. You need to provide the future with the next great teachers, with the next people with new ideas who can continue to teach and to expand, not merely replicate the past. Because the one thing you notice if you look at the past is that all of human history has been about continuing to increase and grow. One of the few things that is true in almost every aspect of life is growth. Life is all about growth. Life is all about living and not staying the same. Very, very few things stay the same. And so growth is always good. So these are some of the things that I would say about that. And going back to our subject of directories, I want to once again recommend pagan.world/directory and the idea of directories in general. I think they're a huge help to the community. I think they're a good help to everyone in the community. And I'm hoping to have much more to say about this project in the future. I'll be back tomorrow and we'll have more things to talk about. And I hope that all of you are having a lovely day. And I love spending this time with you. I love all of you. And let us close with our prayer, as we normally do. And Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives. We rejoice in your presence in our lives, and we ask you to help us to make the connections in our lives that help us to grow and to expand and to become more than we began. Help us to build a better world by building better selves, and to always continue moving forward. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love and thanks. Knowing you are always with us, yet from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. And I thank you for your presence. May you be blessed now and always. And I'll see you again tomorrow.